it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, we're going to go through 10 quick tricks when working with fur yarn. So faux fur yarn is really popular right now. I've been using Red Heart fur quite a bit lately. I have a few patterns where I've incorporated fur yarn into my projects, and I'll share those links below. I've used it in an entire project, I've used it for yarn crafting, and I've used it for edging, and it's a really fun yarn to work with, but it behaves a little bit differently than regular yarn. So again, this is Red Heart fur, and this is actually a little sneak peek of a project that I have coming up, and because we're crocheting an entire project with the fur yarn, I wanted to make a little video just to kind of give you some tips to help you along. So this yarn is the azalea colorway, just as a side note in case you're wondering. And I also use this same yarn for my Valentine wreath that I shared recently. So check those out as well. So let's start with our tips. The first tip, I think is the most important tip, is you want to keep things super simple. We don't want to be doing intricate stitches like cabling or lace or anything too complicated. We want to keep the stitches very simple. So if you're knitting, you want to do very easy stockinette stitch, for example, where you knit all the stitches. If you're crocheting, you want to keep your stitches like single crochets, double crochets, chains, things like that. Now, on the yarn label, there's an example of this. This is a simple scarf, very straightforward. The pattern is on the inside of the label, but it's using very basic stitches to essentially create a long rectangle. So in my sneak peek here, I've also kept the stitches very simple, okay? So you just want to keep things simple because you're not going to see the stitches and the stitch definition. The beauty of this yarn is the fluff. You're just seeing the fluff. So you want to keep things very simple. The next tip I have is that if you're a beginner, using a yarn like this can be a little bit frustrating if you're learning how to make stitches. So you'll want to stick with a yarn that has a smoother ply where you can actually see what you're doing. A lot of times you have to feel for the stitches and the spaces in this and kind of go by your sense of touch and your memory of making stitches. So if you're a beginner, stick with a smoother strand just to learn how to make the stitches, and then you can move on to fun novelty yarns later. Now this is some Red Heart Super Saver in case you're wondering. Okay, so for my third tip, and you can kind of see it up here, is to use very large hooks and needles. This is a 16mm hook, and the recommended hook size on here is a 16mm hook as well, a Q hook, and the scarf in this project they used a P hook. Those are both very large hooks. The same thing goes for knitters. You want to use very large needles because when we look at the strand here, you're going to have kind of a central thread that runs down the middle and all this fluff. So it's going to create some a lot of loftiness, a lot of fluffiness like we talked about before. So using large hooks and needles is very important. Also, if you know how to finger knit or finger crochet, this is a great yarn for that as well. The next tip I have, tip 4, is to create a sample. So if this is the first time you've ever used this yarn, you'll want to kind of play around with it first. See how the yarn behaves, see how it works on your hook, and before you commit to a project, maybe make a little swatch. So try making a chain, try making double crochets, single crochets, and just see how the yarn behaves, okay? The next thing you'll want to do is when you are working a project, now let me just flip this over, you sometimes need to feel for the stitches. So if I kind of dig down into this fluff, I can feel for the loops at the top, which are the stitches, or you can work into the spaces, which are a little bit easier to find. So sometimes you need to feel for the stitches because the fluffiness is going to mask a lot of that, okay? So you'll want to like kind of dig around with your hands and feel for those stitches. Okay, so the next tip I have, if you can't commit to a whole project, if you just don't want to use that much fur, or if you just have, you know, a small amount of it, try working some edging in the fur. It makes a really pretty edge. I have a pair of slipper socks where I used a smoother yarn for the actual sock part, and then I put a fur top around the top. So you can use this for an edging as well. It makes a really fun fluffy edging. I have some slipper socks. They're called the Winter's Warmth slipper socks, and I did a white, it's called Polar with the fur, a polar top, and they look very wintry and cute. So I'll share the link down below for those. Okay, so the next tip I have is tip 7 is to go slow. So if you try to, even though you're using a large hook and fluffy yarn, if you try to just whip through this project, you're going to miss some things and drop some loops. It's really helpful when you're working stitches to really go nice and slow and get a nice fluid motion, and that way your fur won't get tangled and you can just really cruise through the project. But you want to do a nice, slow, steady motion with your yarn, okay? Just like that. The next tip I have, tip 8, is if you're having trouble locating, let me just pull a little bit of this out. If you're having trouble locating the stitches of your project, so remember I was saying before, sometimes you have to feel for those projects. If that is difficult for you or frustrating you, try working into the spaces. The spaces are usually a larger opening in your project, and you can work right into those spaces versus the stitches. So try that and see if you like that. Now, if you're using a pattern, you might have to do exactly what the pattern says, but if you're kind of playing around with this on your own, work into the spaces. And I also mentioned putting an edge around the top. Try working into the spaces of whatever you're working the yarn into to create that edge. So that helps a lot too. Okay, so now my last two tips, tips 9 and 10, are if you've tried this yarn and maybe you just have a little bit, or maybe you want to depart from using a hook and needles and go into the yarn craft arena of things, like my heart wreath. I was just a purely yarn craft project. Try using it for your yarn crafts. So wrap the fur around something, maybe glue it to something, spell out a word or something like that. So try using it for your yarn craft projects as well. It's a great craft tool as well that you can use to enhance some of your projects. Maybe glue it to the edge of something or wrap it around a wreath like I did. So try it for your yarn crafts too. And the last tip I have is if you want an instant garland, and I'll be featuring this in my February update, you can literally use this as a garland. So it is just already like a pre-made garland, and you can just hang it up, and it is so fun and festive. So if you're not ready to try using it with your hook, you can of course use it as a garland, use it in your craft projects. And so I hope these tips helped you. I do get a lot of questions about the fur yarn. And also check out my fur projects below, in the links below as well. I used one is a craft project, one is used as an edging, and then this little project over here is going to be a crochet project as well. So you can try it in a variety of different ways. So those are my 10 tips for using fur yarn. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.